Some men believe they are invincible because they never see the shield protecting them. My ex-husband thought his miraculous health came from superior willpower and his new 20-something girlfriend. He did not know that for 8 long years. I was the ghost in the machine keeping his failing nervous system intact. When he signed those divorce papers with a smug grin, he thought he was cutting me loose. In reality, he was pulling the plug on himself. Hello and a warm welcome to our wonderful listeners here at Maya Revenge Stories. We want to be completely honest with you. YouTube has recently disabled our monetization, leaving us without the budget to keep this channel running. If you find today's story compelling, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel, where you can listen to exclusive true stories that are even more incredible, featuring much longer runtimes, highly detailed situations we cannot share publicly on YouTube, and multiple emotional voice actors bringing the narrative to life. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the comments section of this video. Now, let us begin today's story, told through the eyes of our main character, Naomi West. The ink from the heavy fountain pen felt exceptionally smooth as it glided across the thick, cream-colored paper of the final divorce settlement. I sat in the center of a sleek, glass-walled attorney's office towering high above downtown Seattle, surrounded by the muted gray light of a rainy afternoon. At 38 years old, as a lead cybersecurity architect for one of the largest tech conglomerates in the world, I was accustomed to high-pressure environments. But the atmosphere in this room was not pressure. It was a suffocating, almost comical delusion. And I observed it with the detached precision of someone watching a predictable computer simulation run its course. I remained completely silent. Across the polished mahogany conference table sat Julian. At 42, he looked vibrantly, infuriatingly healthy. His skin possessed a sun-kissed glow, his posture was relaxed, and his hands rested completely steady on the armrests of his leather chair. To anyone else, he was the picture of prime middle-aged vitality. He was also arrogant, wearing a smug, triumphant grin as if he had just won a grueling marathon against me. Leaning into his side, holding his perfectly steady left hand, was Sierra. She was 24 years old, draped in sustainable linen, and smelled faintly of Palo Santo and expensive lavender oil. Julian had proudly introduced her not just as his new fiancée, but as a holistic wellness influencer. She was the pristine, stress-free model he had traded me in for. I just want to say, Naomi, that I harbor no ill will toward you, Julian said, his tone dripping with a practiced, patronizing sympathy. I know my condition was hard on you, but you have to admit, your obsessive tech tinkering and constant monitoring were creating a toxic environment. Stress is the ultimate killer. Since I met Sierra, I have not had a single tremor, not one. I am finally living. Sierra offered me a serene, deeply condescending smile. You can step back now, Naomi, she said, her voice soft and airy. Julian is naturally healed. My crystal alignment therapy and our strict organic, plant-based diet have completely flushed the heavy metals from his nervous system. His energy fields are finally clear. I looked at Julian's steady hands. He suffered from a severe, incredibly rare neurological condition, a degenerative misfiring of his nervous system that used to leave him violently shaking, unable to hold a glass of water, let alone sign a legal document. To combat this, years ago, he had been fitted with an experimental, highly classified bioimplant. What Julian willfully ignored, and what the airy 24-year-old beside him fundamentally could not comprehend, was that the implant was a prototype. It was notoriously unstable. It did not heal him with green juice or the placebo effect of shiny rocks. It worked because I made it work. I did not argue. I did not point out the absurdity of their claims. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer and withdrew a small, heavily encrypted titanium flash drive. It landed on the mahogany table with a sharp, heavy click that echoed in the quiet room. Take this, I said, my voice entirely flat, devoid of any warmth or malice. You must bring it to your next neuroclinic visit and give it directly to your specialist. Julian rolled his eyes, sighing as if I were a nagging mother refusing to let him grow up. Sierra, however, reached out and picked up the titanium drive. She held it between her manicured fingers like it was something dirty. She laughed, a dismissive, tinkling sound. "We really do not need any of your toxic technology in our new life," she declared confidently. Without a second thought, she carelessly tossed the flash drive into the open mouth of her oversized designer tote bag. "Julian's body is a temple now. We are trusting nature, not machines." I held her gaze for a fraction of a second, my expression perfectly blank. "Understood," I replied softly. I picked up the pen one last time, signed the final page of the settlement, and closed the leather binder. Standing up, I smoothed the front of my blazer, picked up my briefcase, and walked toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room. I did not say goodbye. I did not look back at the man who believed he was invincible, nor at the young woman who was completely oblivious to the ticking time bomb sitting next to her. As the elevator doors slid shut behind me, isolating me from the law firm, a profound physical sensation washed over my body, the crushing, suffocating weight of nearly a decade of terrifying, sleepless nights, of listening to proximity alarms and monitoring vital sign telemetry in the dark. Instantly lifted from my shoulders, I took a deep breath of the cool, conditioned air. For the first time in 8 years, I was no longer the ghost in the machine keeping him alive. I was just Naomi, and I was finally free. The drive from downtown to the heavily fortified campus of Nexus Grid Dynamics took exactly 45 minutes. I did not turn on the radio. I let the rhythmic hum of the electric engine ground me. As my vehicle cleared the secondary security gates and descended into the subterranean executive garage, the transition from the messy emotional reality of the law firm to the absolute binary control of my professional domain was complete. I stepped out of the elevator onto the 42nd floor. My heels clicked sharply against the polished obsidian floors. I bypassed the glass-walled conference rooms and the scattered engineering pods, heading straight for my private secured terminal. The biometric scanner read my retina and registered my palm print. The massive, curved monitors on my desk flared to life, bathing the dim room in a harsh, cold blue light. My fingers found the keyboard, moving with ruthless efficiency. For nearly a decade, this specific terminal had served as a secret, secondary hospital room. I bypassed the standard corporate firewalls, tunneling deep into a hidden directory I had buried beneath layers of heavily encrypted dummy files. I executed the command prompt. The screen instantly flooded with thousands of lines of rapid-fire, proprietary neural calibration software. This was my unseen masterpiece. It was a highly classified, totally off-the-books algorithm I had coded completely from scratch. The medical manufacturer of the experimental bioimplant had built the physical hardware, but their baseline software was dangerously flawed. It was riddled with latency issues and predictive errors that caused devastating, violent nervous system misfires. The company had no permanent fix. So, I built one myself, every single night, while he slept deeply in our climate-controlled bedroom. I had manually sifted through his raw synaptic telemetry. I spent thousands of hours writing micro-adjustments, compiling code, and pushing live, invisible patches to his device just to keep the hardware from attacking his own brain. I was the silent, digital firewall standing between him and total physiological collapse. Today, that firewall was coming down. I opened the corporate human resources portal. As a lead architect, my employment package included Nexus Grid Tier 1 Executive Bioinsurance. It was the kind of elite coverage money simply could not buy, granting instantaneous access to top-tier neurologists, immediate hardware replacements, and absolute priority in any medical emergency. He had enjoyed this invisible, bulletproof shield for years, arrogantly assuming his VIP treatment in hospitals was simply a byproduct of his own personal charm and social standing. I navigated to the dependent registry and pulled up his profile. My finger hovered over the delete key for only a fraction of a second before I pressed it down hard, with a single, decisive keystroke. I officially revoked his access to the executive tier. A loading bar appeared, turning from a vibrant green to a harsh, flashing red. The system automatically downgraded his profile, dumping him aggressively into the standard, notoriously slow public coverage plan, the safety net of unlimited funds, instantaneous approvals, and zero wait times dissolved instantly into the bureaucratic ether. From this moment on, every single scan, every single pill, and every single doctor visit would require weeks of agonizing authorization. There was one final, critical protocol to execute. I picked up my secure, encrypted desk line and dialed the direct emergency contact for the implant manufacturer's lead medical tech liaison. The line rang exactly twice before a familiar voice answered. "Systems support. This is Marcus." "Marcus, it is Naomi West," I stated, my voice entirely stripped of any human inflection. "I am calling to formally withdraw my legal and technical status as lead systems proxy for hardware serial number Alpha 739. There was a sharp, sudden intake of breath on the other end of the line. I heard the frantic, rapid clacking of a keyboard as Marcus hurriedly pulled up the patient file. "Naomi, wait," Marcus said, his voice instantly tightening with genuine panic. "You cannot just withdraw. You are the only authorized external architect pushing custom patches to that specific prototype. We do not have the internal software framework to stabilize his latency issues. If you stop the daily micro-adjustments, his hardware is going to fall entirely out of sync with his central nervous system. That is no longer my legal responsibility or my personal concern," I replied smoothly, staring at the lines of code on my monitor. "The proxy withdrawal is effective immediately. I need you to permanently disable my remote access port." "Naomi, listen to me," Marcus pleaded, the professional, corporate decorum dropping completely as he realized the catastrophic reality of what I was doing. "I am looking at his baseline analytics right now. The native code is unstable garbage. Without your custom algorithm holding the framework together, his device will begin to rapidly desync. He will experience massive neurological feedback loops. The hardware will catastrophically fail within 72 hours. He will be completely incapacitated. I have provided him with the necessary documentation and an encrypted hard copy of the final calibration state to hand over to his clinic," I said, my tone remaining as steady and relentless as a metronome. "Whatever happens next is entirely between him, his doctor, and his new primary caretaker." "He does not have another authorized proxy on file," Marcus insisted, his voice rising in sheer desperation, fully aware of the disaster looming on the horizon. "Who is going to handle the daily system maintenance?" I looked at the blinking cursor on my otherwise empty screen, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. "His new partner," I said softly, enunciating every syllable. "She is a wellness expert. I am sure she has the situation completely under control." Before Marcus could utter another desperate word of warning, I reached out and disconnected the call. I typed the final command prompt to permanently sever my terminal's connection to the bio-implant. I hit enter, the live telemetry feed on my screen, a pulsing green rhythm of data that I had anxiously watched over for thousands of exhausted nights, suddenly snapped and went completely black. The digital lifeline was severed. The transition from my former life to my new one felt less like a move and more like an emergency evacuation from a sterile medical facility. I left behind a sprawling, minimalist smart home made of glass, cold steel, and harsh white lighting. Every single room in that house had been wired with biometric scanners, temperature regulators, and ambient proximity sensors that constantly fed data to my phone. It was not a home. It was a high-functioning intensive care unit masquerading as modern architecture. Now, I stood in the middle of a vibrant, beautifully chaotic loft bathed in late afternoon sunlight. The space belonged to my best friend, Elena, a fiercely protective woman who had spent the last several years watching me slowly disappear into my duties as a caretaker. Her apartment was bursting with life. There were overgrown pothos plants trailing down the exposed brick walls, deeply worn velvet armchairs, and a kitchen that actually smelled like roasting garlic and warm spices instead of medical-grade sanitizer. Drink, Elena commanded softly, pressing a heavy crystal glass filled with dark red wine into my hand. She wrapped a thick, woven blanket around my shoulders and guided me to the plush sofa. You are safe here, Naomi. No one is monitoring anything. We sat in the comforting silence of the evening as the city lights flickered to life outside the massive industrial windows. I drank the wine, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, melting away the residual ice of the afternoon. That night, I experienced a miracle I had not known for 8 long years. I slept. I did not just doze lightly while keeping one ear tuned to the digital hum of a medical router. I sank into a profound, unbroken, heavy sleep. For almost 3,000 nights, my subconscious had been anchored to the high-pitched chirp of a proximity alarm or the flashing red light of a vital sign monitor warning me that his heart rate was dropping or his synaptic rhythm was failing. I used to wake up violently, heart pounding in my throat, hands already reaching for my diagnostic tablet. But when I opened my eyes in Elena's guest room, the only sound was the gentle tapping of morning rain against the glass. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, realizing that no alarms had sounded. No one needed to be recalibrated. The silence was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I threw off the covers, feeling lighter than air, and padded out to the kitchen to pour a mug of dark roast coffee. I brought the mug back to the bedroom, opened my personal laptop, and stared at the backup folders containing the thousands of lines of behavioral code I had written for him. Looking at the complex architecture of the algorithm, a sharp, uninvited memory forced its way into my mind. I was transported back to a lavish Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago at the sprawling estate owned by his wealthy, old-money parents. I had spent the entire meal hiding my phone under the linen tablecloth, frantically typing command lines with one hand to stabilize a sudden, dangerous spike in his neural feedback loop. I was sweating, terrified he was going to seize right there over the roasted turkey. His mother, a woman who treated my career in cybersecurity like a cute, mildly annoying hobby, had leaned across the table with a disapproving scowl. "Naomi, must you always be glaring at that screen?" she had scolded, her voice carrying over the polite chatter of the room. "You carry so much tense, negative energy. It is no wonder Julian looks so strained lately. You are constantly stressing him out. A wife should be a calming presence, not a corporate drone." Julian had just smiled that easy, golden boy smile, reaching out with a perfectly steady hand to sip his expensive wine. That same hand would have been violently thrashing against the crystal goblet if I had not just manually overridden a glitch in his processor 30 seconds prior. He never defended me. He simply agreed with them, completely oblivious to the fact that my programming genius was the only thing keeping him walking, talking, and breathing. They all thought his stability was a testament to his good breeding and expensive vitamins. I blinked away the memory, the bitter taste of their ungratefulness fading against the rich flavor of my coffee. Without a single ounce of hesitation, I highlighted the master folder. I hit delete. I emptied the digital trash bin. I permanently erased the proprietary framework from my hard drive. The code was gone. Just as the screen cleared, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up to see a text message from his younger brother, a notoriously entitled trust fund manager. The message read, "Saw the settlement paperwork went through. Honestly, do not feel too bad. Naomi, you have always been way too uptight and overly analytical for a guy like him. He needs someone young and spiritual to match his natural vibe. Enjoy the single life." A year ago, a message like that would have broken my heart. I would have drafted a dozen furious replies, desperate to scream the truth, desperate to justify my silent, agonizing sacrifices. I would have wanted to tell him that his brother's natural vibe was a manufactured illusion running on my software. Today, I simply laughed. I did not type a single word in response. I blocked the number and tossed the phone onto the bed. I had zero desire to explain the architecture of a sinking ship to the rats who were happily dancing on the deck. I walked out into the living room, feeling a sudden, irrepressible surge of energy. "Elena," I called out, finding her at the kitchen counter. "Put your shoes on. We are going out." "Where are we going?" she asked, looking delightfully surprised by my sudden burst of life. "I am going to reclaim my joy," I declared. An hour later, the two of us were standing in the middle of a noisy, chaotic municipal animal shelter on the outskirts of the city. For years, I had begged him for a pet. I desperately wanted the unconditional love and grounding presence of a dog. He had flatly refused every single time, claiming that the chaotic biological frequency of an animal would disrupt his delicate healing aura and bring unwanted pathogens into his pristine sanctuary. I walked past dozens of metal cages until I saw him. He was a scruffy, clumsy, incredibly awkward terrier mix with oversized ears and a tail that thumped relentlessly against the chain-link gate. He was not purebred. He was not immaculate. He was absolutely perfect. I knelt down on the concrete floor, letting the little dog lick my fingers through the wire. I filled out the adoption paperwork with a hand that was trembling not from stress, but from pure, unadulterated happiness. When I finally walked out of the shelter doors and stepped into the bright afternoon sun with the leash in my hand, the little puppy happily trotting by my side, the final chain shattered, Naomi West was finally, truly alive. 48 hours later, the towering red rocks of Sedona, Arizona, glowed like burning embers in the late afternoon sun. Julian lay stretched out on a hand-carved teak lounger at one of the most exclusive, staggeringly expensive luxury wellness retreats in the American Southwest. The air smelled strongly of burning sage and imported mineral clay. He was perfectly relaxed, wearing pristine white organic cotton, holding a heavy crystal tumbler of iced cucumber water. He closed his eyes, feeling the warm desert breeze, utterly convinced that he had finally engineered the perfect life. Suddenly, the water inside the crystal glass began to ripple. Julian frowned, opening his eyes and looking around, assuming a heavy maintenance truck was passing by the private villa, but the vibration was not in the ground. It was originating inside his own wrist, his right hand, wrapped securely around the cold tumbler, gave a violent, involuntary jerk. The glass slipped instantly from his fingers, shattering loudly against the terracotta tiles and sending ice and water everywhere. He stared at his hand. The fingers were spasming aggressively, pulling inward towards his palm in a terrifying, rigid, claw-like grip. It was a tremor, a massive, relentless, uncontrollable tremor, the exact kind of catastrophic neurological misfire he had not experienced in nearly 3,000 days. He grabbed his right wrist with his left hand, trying to physically force the shaking to stop by using pure muscle, but the violent rhythm only intensified, traveling rapidly up his forearm and radiating into his shoulder. The muscles jumped and twitched wildly under his skin. Hearing the loud crash, Sierra strolled out onto the private terrace, holding a delicate ceramic teapot. She looked down at the shattered glass scattered across the patio, and then at Julian. He was white-knuckled, sweating profusely, actively wrestling with his own rebellious limb. "Oh, my beautiful soul, do not fight it," Sierra cooed, her voice dripping with a serene, infuriatingly calm detachment. She stepped gracefully over the sharp shards of broken glass and poured a steaming cup of dark green liquid. "Your energy fields are just heavily recalibrating right now. Those are the negative toxins actively leaving your cellular structure. The deep tissue crystal massage you had this morning is flushing out years of suppressed, toxic trauma. Drink some of this dandelion and burdock root detox tea. It will ground your frequency and align your chakras." Julian completely ignored the tea. His breathing grew terribly shallow. A cold, absolute, paralyzing terror began to pool in the pit of his stomach. He managed to shove his trembling left hand into the pocket of his linen trousers, pulling out his sleek smartphone. He fumbled frantically with the biometric lock, taking 5 agonizing attempts to get the scanner to read his sweating, shaking thumb. He immediately navigated to the proprietary medical application for his bio-implant, desperate to check the diagnostic battery and see why the system was lagging. For 8 uninterrupted years, any minor electrical anomaly in his nervous system had been seamlessly and instantly corrected in the background. He had never even felt the hardware working. He had assumed it was magic, or better yet, his own superior genetics kicking back in. The application screen loaded, but instead of the familiar, comforting green dashboard detailing his perfect neural synchronization, the screen flashed a harsh, blinding, panic-inducing yellow. The words, "Premium Access Revoked," scrolled aggressively across the top of the display. Below that, a massive, impenetrable digital padlock icon pulsed in rhythm with his racing heart, alongside a terrifying error message, "Critical sync failure. Manual calibration proxy required." The color completely drained from Julian's face, leaving him looking like a ghost. The automated system was not lagging. It was not working at all. The invisible, miraculous shield he had arrogantly enjoyed for nearly a decade was gone. The horrifying realization struck him like a physical blow to the chest. His body was not naturally healed. He was actively, rapidly degenerating. And the highly advanced machine implanted inside his chest had absolutely no idea how to stop the cascade of failing signals. It was blind and rudderless. He gasped for air, his chest tightening as a sharp, electrical pain shot straight up his spinal cord. "Sierra," he choked out, his voice cracking with genuine, unadulterated panic. "The drive. Where is the titanium flash drive Naomi left on the table at the attorney's office? I need it right now. It must have the backup access codes to reset the firmware." Sierra sighed deeply, rolling her eyes as she took a delicate sip of her hot tea. "Julian, please, I told you we are moving forward into the light, not backward into the dark. I threw that ugly little thing into a commercial dumpster outside a coffee shop right after we left the law firm in Seattle. It was literally vibrating with bitter ex-wife energy. You do not need her toxic digital garbage cluttering up your sacred temple." Julian stared at her, utterly paralyzed by the sheer, devastating magnitude of her ignorance. He opened his mouth to scream at her, to explain that she had just casually tossed away the absolute only map to his survival, but his vocal cords suddenly seized in a tight, choking spasm. The world around him tilted violently to the left. The stunning red rocks of Sedona blurred into a sickening, dizzying smear of crimson and brown. A high-pitched, deafening ringing erupted in his ears, completely drowning out the ambient, relaxing sounds of the luxury retreat. He tried to stand up, desperate to get to the landline phone inside the master suite to call for real medical help, but the moment he put his weight on his legs, his knees completely buckled beneath him. He collapsed hard onto the warm terracotta floor, his entire right side convulsing wildly, completely out of his control. "Call an ambulance," he wheezed, his face pressed against the hard stone, the glorious golden illusion of his supreme invincibility shattering completely into a million jagged pieces. "Cancel everything. Get me a medical transport flight back to Seattle immediately. I need my specialist right now." The emergency medical transport flight from Arizona back to Seattle was an excruciating nightmare. By the time Julian was hauled through the sliding glass doors of the prestigious Pacific Northwest Neurological Institute, his entire right side was locked in a brutal, continuous spasm. He was sweating through his ruined organic linen, heavily supported by two grim-faced paramedics. Sierra trailed behind them, loudly complaining to no one in particular about how the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital was completely fracturing her carefully cultivated aura. Julian expected the usual routine. For almost a decade, his arrivals at the clinic were treated with the utmost reverence. He was accustomed to being immediately whisked away on a plush wheelchair, directly into a private, soundproofed VIP recovery suite with ambient lighting and Egyptian cotton sheets. He expected a team of nurses offering him imported sparkling water while waiting for his specialist. Instead, the paramedics deposited him unceremoniously into a stiff plastic chair in the chaotic, crowded general waiting room. Julian gritted his teeth, his jaw trembling violently, and glared at the front desk. "Tell Dr. Vance I am here," he snapped at the unsmiling receptionist. "And get me a private room right now. This is completely unacceptable." The receptionist, a stern woman who had never seen Julian without his invisible corporate shield, did not even blink. She slid a massive, heavy clipboard across the counter. It was stacked with dozens of standard, brightly colored intake forms. "Fill these out entirely," she said, her voice flat and bureaucratic. "And I need a method of payment for the initial diagnostic deposit." "A deposit?" Julian scoffed, a mixture of outrage and terror coloring his voice. "Do you have any idea who I am? Run my file. I am on the Nexus Grid Tier 1 Executive Bioinsurance Plan. I have absolute priority." The receptionist typed a few keystrokes, her eyes scanning the monitor. "Not anymore, sir. Your Tier 1 coverage was legally tied exclusively to the employment of Naomi West at Nexus Grid Dynamics. That proxy was formally revoked and severed 2 days ago. You have been downgraded to the standard public care tier. Because this is a highly specialized experimental device, your new public plan does not cover immediate emergency stabilization without prior administrative authorization, which takes up to 3 weeks. She looked at him with cold indifference. "To bypass the waiting period and see a specialist today, our financial department requires an out-of-pocket, upfront deposit of $150,000. Julian stared at her, the blood draining from his face. $150,000. He was wealthy, yes, but his money was tied up in slow-moving family trusts and real estate. He did not have that kind of liquid cash immediately accessible on a debit card. He slammed his shaking left hand against the counter, throwing a massive, humiliated tantrum right in the middle of the crowded room. "This is extortion," Julian screamed, his voice cracking wildly. "I am a VIP patient. My family built half the wings in this godforsaken hospital. You cannot treat me like some common person walking off the street. Get Dr. Vance out here immediately before I sue this entire clinic into the ground." The commotion caught the attention of a passing medical resident, who quickly paged the head of the department. Minutes later, Dr. Vance, a brilliant but chronically stressed neurosurgeon, pushed through the double doors. Seeing Julian violently thrashing in the plastic chair, the doctor bypassed the financial desk and ordered the orderlies to rush him straight into a stark, brightly lit examination room. There were no Egyptian cotton sheets here. It was a cold, sterilized room filled with sharp metallic instruments and heavy diagnostic machinery. "Doctor?" Vance wasted no time. He ripped open Julian's shirt and attached a dozen fibrous sensor patches directly to the skin above the embedded implant. He plugged the hardline diagnostic cable into the port on the monitor. The screen flared to life, flooding with raw, unfiltered telemetry data. "Doctor." Vance took one single look at the chaotic, violently fluctuating red lines cascading across the display, and his face went completely pale with absolute dread. "My God." "Doctor," Vance whispered, stepping back from the monitor as if the machine itself were about to explode. "The baseline framework is entirely dissolving. The latency is off the charts. Julian, your hardware is attacking your central nervous system. The daily micro-adjustments have completely stopped." The doctor spun around, his eyes wide with frantic urgency. "Where is the proxy drive Naomi always maintained the proprietary patches? We do not have the code to stabilize this prototype natively. I need the encrypted titanium flash drive she left for you. Hand it over right now so I can manually inject the backup codes and force a hard reset before you suffer a catastrophic stroke." Julian could not speak. His throat was locked in a tight spasm of pure terror. He managed to turn his head, fixing a desperate, wild-eyed stare on Sierra, who was standing in the corner of the room, looking thoroughly bored by the medical jargon. "The drive." "Doctor," Vance demanded again, his voice echoing sharply in the sterile room. "Where is it?" Sierra crossed her arms, her sustainable linen dress looking suddenly absurd in the harsh clinical light. She blinked her large eyes, completely devoid of understanding. "I told you, Julian, I threw it away in a dumpster in Seattle. It was toxic. It carried bitter ex-wife energy. We do not need artificial computer codes. Doctor, he just needs to align his frequencies and drink his tea." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the erratic, terrifying blare of the heart monitor. Julian turned on Sierra. The glamorous, golden facade of their perfect, natural healing journey completely shattered into dust. He looked at the young, empty-headed woman he had proudly paraded in front of his ex-wife just 48 hours ago, and he felt a surge of furious, unadulterated rage. "You idiot!" Julian roared, the word tearing out of his throat with enough force to make his own vocal cords bleed. "You stupid, arrogant little girl. That was not toxic energy. That was my life support. You threw away my life." He lunged toward her, his face twisted in a mask of primal fury, but his legs finally gave out completely. He crashed violently to the sterile linoleum floor, tangled in a mess of wires and diagnostic cables, a broken, helpless man trapped inside a failing machine, screaming at a woman who was too foolish to even realize she had just signed his death warrant. The orderlies hoisted Julian off the sterile linoleum, heavily strapping his convulsing frame back into the examination chair. He looked completely pathetic, a king violently stripped of his crown, gasping for breath as his muscles continued their relentless, involuntary rebellion. "Doctor." Vance did not rush forward to comfort him. The seasoned neurosurgeon stood perfectly still, his arms crossed over his white coat, looking down at his former VIP patient with a mixture of profound pity and absolute clinical detachment. He was finally ready to dismantle the delusion once and for all. "Listen to me very carefully. Julian." "Doctor," Vance began, his voice dropping to a low, uncompromising register that left no room for argument. "You need to understand exactly what is happening to your body right now. For years, you paraded into my office, boasting about your miraculous, natural recovery. You credited green juices, positive thinking, and good genetics, but your recovery was never natural. It was an absolute mirage." Julian blinked rapidly, his eyes wide with panic, sweat stinging his vision. He tried to shake his head, but the tremors made it impossible to control his movements. "The prototype implant inside your chest is fundamentally flawed, Doctor," Vance continued relentlessly, pointing a stern finger at the chaotic telemetry monitor. "It was designed to fail. The only reason you have been walking, talking, and living a completely normal life for the past 8 years is because Naomi manually patched your failing code every single night while you slept. She wrote thousands of lines of proprietary software from scratch just to stop the hardware from frying your brain. She was your life support, and you drove her away." "Doctor." Vance leaned in closer, delivering the crushing climax with razor-sharp finality. "Your ex ended your care. Without her proprietary algorithms, this implant is actively reverting to its baseline state. You are entirely on your own." The words hung in the cold, sterilized air, completely suffocating Julian. The invincible shield was officially gone. He hysterically reached out with his violently shaking left hand, awkwardly grabbing the sleeve of the doctor's white coat. "Call her," Julian begged, his voice a wet, pathetic sob. "Call Naomi right now. Tell her I will pay her whatever she wants. Tell her I'm sorry. Just make her turn the system back on. Please, you have to contact her." "Doctor." Vance firmly peeled Julian's trembling fingers off his coat. "I cannot do that. Julian, when Naomi severed her proxy access, she legally locked the entire system. She formally transferred all medical and financial liability back to you. Furthermore, as an elite cybersecurity architect, she completely scrubbed every single trace of her personal contact data from our hospital servers. She does not exist in our network anymore. We have absolutely no way to reach her. And even if we did, she is under no legal obligation to save you." In the corner of the room, Sierra had been standing entirely motionless, pressed flat against the pale wall. The serene, holistic wellness influencer was rapidly processing the brutal reality unfolding before her eyes. She looked at Julian, who was now loudly weeping, his body severely disabled, heavily reliant on a broken machine. She looked at the massive stack of intake forms on the counter, remembering the terrifying initial out-of-pocket demand for $150,000 just to get admitted. The glamorous facade was dead. She was no longer attached to a wealthy, vibrant, perfectly healthy older man, she was suddenly tied to a financially ruined, chronically ill patient who would require round-the-clock intensive care for the rest of his life. Sierra did not say a single word. She did not offer a comforting touch or a crystal to align his failing energy fields. She simply picked up her oversized designer tote bag, turned on her heel, and quietly slipped out of the heavy clinic door. She walked rapidly down the long hospital corridor, completely abandoning him without a second glance. Julian heard the heavy door click shut. He managed to turn his head just in time to see her shadow disappear through the frosted glass. He was utterly alone. He sat violently trembling in the exam chair, staring blankly at the massive stack of catastrophic medical bills waiting to be signed. In the quiet, suffocating terror of that sterile room, the ultimate truth finally broke him. He had gleefully, arrogantly thrown away the absolute only person in the entire world who had ever kept him alive. Hundreds of miles away, the salty, fresh breeze of the Pacific Ocean whipped gently through the air. Naomi West walked barefoot along a sunlit, golden beach. The rhythmic crashing of the ocean waves was the only sound around her. She wore a simple, oversized sweater, her face bathed in the warm, radiant glow of the late afternoon sun. Tugging playfully at the end of a bright red leash was her scruffy, clumsy rescue puppy. The little dog bounded happily through the shallow surf, barking at the seagulls, bringing a chaotic, beautiful joy into her life. Naomi laughed, a deep, genuine sound that came from the very bottom of her soul. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her smartphone to check the time. The screen was perfectly blank. There were no proximity alarms. There were no frantic text messages. There were no vital sign alerts demanding her immediate attention. The digital silence was absolute perfection. Her mind was entirely clear, unburdened by the heavy, invisible chains of the past decade. Naomi took a deep breath of the clean ocean air, smiling brightly as she stepped forward into a vibrant, endless future that finally, truly, belonged only to her. Thank you so much, our wonderful listeners, for tuning in to the conclusion of today's story. We truly appreciate you spending your valuable time with us. Where in the world are you listening from today? Please let us know in the comments below. If you found today's journey compelling and enjoyed the story, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you can listen to our absolute best, highly exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code right here on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next story.